The desert had felt endless that morning, quiet enough that Jake Walker could hear his own breath as he rode along the rocky wash he'd been checking for traps. 3 hours passed without anything unusual, until a sound cut through the stillness. A scream so raw it didn't sound fully human. It came from deep inside the Redstone ravine, the kind of cry someone makes only after trying too long not to make one at all. Jake followed it, reins tight in his hand, until he spotted her lying in the sand between two tall slabs of rock. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. She was a large woman, strong and broad-shouldered, with her leg caught inside a steel trap built for something far bigger than animals. The metal teeth had bitten deep, darkening the ground beneath her with dried and fresh blood. Even in that state, she didn't plead. Her hand went straight for the knife, strapped to her side, her eyes locked on him like she'd fight him with her last breath. That alone told Jake that whatever trouble she was in, it didn't start with the trap. His horse smelled the blood before he did, snorting uneasily as he stepped closer. The land here was disputed ground. Settlers stayed clear, and so did most Apache bands. Jake preferred it that way. Fewer people meant fewer questions. But the woman on the ground wasn't someone who ran from anything. She was dressed in traditional clothing, leather, beadwork, a simple bone necklace. Dust clung to her dark hair. Every breath she took looked like it cost her something. Jake raised both hands slowly to show he meant no harm, even if his own knife hung at his belt. She said something in a sharp, warning tone. He didn't understand the language, but the meaning was obvious enough. Touch me and die. He didn't argue, just met her eyes, made sure she saw he wasn't backing off, then crouched beside the trap anyway. The mechanism was new, heavy, meant to hold a person without killing them outright. That bothered him more than her knife did. He worked the release with steady hands, ignoring the tension creeping up the back of his neck. Her fingers trembled around the knife from blood loss and exhaustion, but she didn't drop it. When the jaws finally opened with a grinding snap, she gasped, the first real crack in her tough exterior. Blood poured freely from her leg. Jake tore off his bandana and wrapped it tight. She didn't fight in that time. Her eyes were losing focus, her strength slipping away as fever began to take hold. Jake lifted her onto his horse with effort. She was unconscious before he even settled her. There was only one place close enough with water, a small hidden spring he'd used a couple of days earlier. It wasn't much, but it was shade, shelter, and privacy. As the horse picked its way across the canyon, Jake kept scanning the ridge lines. The trap wasn't random. Someone had put it there on purpose. Someone hunting people. The ride took longer than he liked. The woman drifted in and out, murmuring words he didn't understand, stiffening with pain when the horse's gait shifted. They reached the spring just as the sun dipped and shadows stretched across the ground. He eased her against the rock wall, built a fire, and boiled water. When he unwrapped the bandana, he saw just how deep the trap had torn her. Bone peeked through shredded muscle. She woke enough to grip his wrist when the hot water touched the wound, eyes wild with pain, whispering something like a warning or a curse. But he stayed focused, cleaning, bandaging, working as carefully as he could. By the time he finished, she'd passed out again. Jake leaned against the stone, exhausted. Then he saw them, fresh boot prints near the spring. 3, maybe 4 sets. Not Apache. They led east, the same direction he had come from. They'd been here recently. Maybe watching. Maybe circling back. The smart thing would be to leave her water and supplies, then get out before they returned. Jake almost convinced himself to do exactly that. But then he heard horses approaching, several of them, fast, and not even trying to be quiet. He acted on instinct, dragging the woman deeper under the overhang, covering her with his bedroll, scattering the fire, and moving to the narrow canyon entrance with his rifle. If the men coming were looking for her, they'd have to get through him first. 4 riders came into view at the canyon mouth, their horses sweaty and dust-covered from hard push. They weren't Apache. Jake knew that before he even saw their faces. These were white men with the kind of roughness that didn't come from ranch work. The lead rider was thick-built with a scar cutting down the side of his cheek, his rifle resting across his saddle like it lived there. They spotted Jake immediately. All four jerked their horses to a stop, hands drifting toward weapons. No one spoke at first. Then the Scar Man gave a grin that showed too many missing teeth. "Saw your tracks," he said, voice like gravel. "Thought we'd see who's using our water." Jake kept his rifle low but ready. Didn't know it belonged to anyone. "Don't need markers out here," the man drawled. "Just need to know who belongs. And who don't." His eyes moved past Jake, searching the shadows of the overhang. "You alone." "That's right." The younger rider, thin, with a twitchy mustache, pointed toward the rocks. "There's blood over there." The scarred man chuckled. "You wouldn't happen to have found something of ours, would you?" "Big Apache woman, strong as hell, probably hurt real bad. We set a little trap for her yesterday. Looks like she stepped in it just fine." Jake said nothing. His thumb rested against the rifle's hammer. The scarred man spit into the dirt. "You're a terrible liar, friend. We tracked her right into this canyon." He looked at his men, giving a small nod. "Here's how this goes. You step aside and let us take back what's ours, or we take her anyway and leave you in a hole." 4 against 1. Jake knew the math. The canyon was tight. 1 at a time, maybe 2 if they pressed. The first man threw a die, maybe the second too, but he didn't like the odds past that. His mind raced for an answer he didn't have yet. Then a sound rolled across the desert, low at first, then loud enough to vibrate the very ground beneath them. Dozens of horses, many voices, Apache voices, shouting commands and calls that echoed off the canyon walls. The scarred man went pale. "Move!" he barked, turning so fast his horse nearly stumbled. The other 3 riders bolted after him, scrambling back the way they came. Within seconds they were nothing but dust and fading hoofbeats. Jake exhaled slowly, lowering his rifle. But the relief didn't last long. The Apache riders were getting closer, fast. He turned back toward the overhang. The woman stirred beneath the bedroll, her voice a rough whisper. "They come for me," she said with a heavy accent. "And now they find you." The words weren't a threat. They were a warning. Apache warriors appeared along the canyon rim a moment later, silhouettes against the sky. 15, maybe 20 of them, mounted and armed, silent as shadows. They didn't charge down. They formed a perimeter, watching, studying. Jake kept his rifle down. Raising it would get him killed before he could blink. The woman lifted herself with effort, pushing aside the cover. She shouted something up toward the warriors, short, strained, but carrying authority. A few riders shifted in response. Then one man broke away from the rim, guiding his horse down the steep slope with a confidence that came from a lifetime of doing it. He was massive, broad shoulders, steady eyes, wearing traditional clothing marked with beadwork, feathers, and the bearing of someone who commanded respect. A leader. He dismounted in front of Jake and the woman. She spoke quickly to him, gesturing to her wound and to Jake. Her words came hurried but clear. The chief listened without interrupting. His look shifted from cold fury to something heavier, more complicated. He knelt beside her and checked the bandages Jake had wrapped. His hands were large but surprisingly gentle. When he stood again, he turned to Jake fully. "You saved my daughter," he said in accented but steady English. The words hit Jake like a punch. "Daughter." Jake swallowed. "Found her in a trap. Didn't know who she was. She needed help." "You see the men who said it?" the chief asked. 4 of them, Jake replied. "They were here. Left when they heard your riders." The chief issued a sharp command in Apache, and several warriors peeled off instantly, racing after the fleeing men. Then the chief faced Jake again. "I am Chief Martin," he said. "My daughter is Anna." Anna, a strong, simple American name, fitting her power, her presence. Chief Martin studied Jake with eyes that didn't blink. "You stay with her. You touch her wounds. You protect her when riders come." His voice grew formal, heavy with meaning. "By our law, you claim her now, and she claims you." Jake's stomach dropped. "I didn't claim anything. I just helped." "Does not matter what you meant," the chief said. "Matters what you did." He pointed toward Anna. "Tomorrow, when the sun is high, you marry my daughter. This is not request. This is law." Jake felt the canyon walls close in around him. Anna watched him silently, face unreadable, revealing nothing. "And if I refuse?" Jake asked quietly. Chief Martin gave a cold, humorless smile. "Then you dishonor her. You dishonor me. You dishonor my people. And we do not let dishonor walk away." They rode toward the Apache village in a formation that made Jake feel something he hadn't felt in years, small, exposed, and completely out of control of his own fate. Anna rode beside him now, though her father had given her a calmer horse. Her injured leg was positioned carefully, but Jake could still see how her jaw tightened each time the animal shifted under her. She didn't complain. Not once. Jake kept stealing glances at her, wondering what she thought about any of this, being trapped, being hurt, being dragged back to her people with a stranger who had accidentally stepped in her life at the worst possible moment. But she never met his eyes. She stared ahead, her face steady, giving away nothing. The village appeared in a valley shaped like a bowl, red cliffs towering around it like ancient walls. Dozens of small homes made of branches and hide sat in neat lines, smoke drifting up from cooking fires. Children paused their play to watch the riders. Women stopped grinding corn or washing hides. The whole place went quiet in a way that made Jake tense. He wasn't just stepping into a village. He was stepping into judgment. Chief Martin motioned for Jake to follow him inside a larger hut near the center. The dim interior felt cool against Jake's sunburned skin. Animal hides covered the floor. Weapons hung neatly along the poles that supported the structure. Chief Martin sat, then pointed for Jake to sit too. Jake lowered himself slowly, not wanting to appear disrespectful. The chief poured water from a clay pot, offering it first to Jake. That alone surprised him. He wasn't sure if it was respect or formality, but either way, he took it. The water tasted earthy and clean. "You want to know why men hunted my daughter?" Chief Martin said, not asking, stating. Jake nodded because, yes, he wanted to understand how any of this had led to him being told he had to marry someone he'd met only hours ago. "Anna is one of our best scouts," Martin said. "She finds danger before it finds us." His expression darkened. 3 weeks ago, she found strangers building pens on our land. Not for animals, for people. Jake felt his stomach twist. He'd heard rumors of slavers working the border areas, but not this far north. "They took people. They took whoever they could catch," the chief said, voice tightening. "Men, women, children. Sold them south. Anna destroyed the pens. Freed the ones she could." Jake looked over at the hut's entrance where sunlight spilled across the floor. "So they set a trap for her. They waited for her. They studied her paths," Martin said. "And if you had not found her, they would have taken her. Or worse." Jake didn't want to imagine what worse meant. Chief Martin leaned closer, eyes steady and unflinching. "You saved her life, not because you wanted anything, because you're the kind of man who cannot walk away when someone bleeds." It wasn't a compliment. It was a simple truth spoken plainly, and Jake didn't know how to respond. "You stay with her when danger comes. You face men who hunt her." The chief's voice softened slightly. "And now, because of this, you are tied to her." Jake rubbed the back of his neck. "What if she doesn't want this? What if I don't?" "Marriage is," he hesitated. "It's not a small thing." "You ask her," the chief said. "She waits outside." He stood and left, letting the flap fall closed behind him. Jake sat in silence for a moment, breathing slowly. He felt like the room was shrinking around him. He wasn't scared of these people. He was scared of what they expected from him: commitment, loyalty, belonging. Things he'd walked away from a long time ago. The flap opened again. Anna stepped inside. She moved on her injured leg with slow care, but there was nothing fragile about her. Her eyes were sharp, and she sat across from him with the kind of controlled strength that Jake respected without understanding. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The quiet wasn't awkward. It felt like both of them were trying to figure out where the other stood. Finally, Anna broke the silence. "You can run tonight," she said. Her voice was calm, but tired. "My father will track you, but you could try." Jake almost laughed. Would he catch me? Yes. No hesitation. But he would respect the attempt. Jake studied her face, trying to read something. Fear, resentment, reluctance. But Anna was hard to read, trained to hide things. Do you want me to run? A small shift in her eyes gave her away. Just a flicker. Not quite fear. Not quite hope. Something in between. It doesn't matter what I want, she said. Law is law. It matters to me, Jake said softly. That surprised her. Her eyes widened just a little, as if she hadn't expected him to care what she thought. She drew a slow breath, choosing her words carefully. Those men who trapped me, they aren't done. They will come again, and they will hurt more than my people. Marriage to me ties you to us. You stand with us. You fight with us. Or you run and stay alone. Her gaze held his without flinching. What kind of man are you? Jake didn't answer. Not yet. Because he didn't know. Not really. But the question stayed with him long after she left the hut and the night settled over the valley. Jake didn't sleep that night. He lay outside the small hut they'd given him, back against a warm stone, watching the stars drift across the dark sky. The village was quiet except for the soft crackle of dying fire pits and the occasional whinny of a restless horse. Everyone else slept like they belonged here, like their lives made sense. Jake couldn't remember the last time anything in his life made sense. He kept replaying Anna's words in his head. What kind of man are you? It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a challenge. It was something else entirely. A question that forced him to look at himself in a way he hadn't dared to for years. He thought about running. He always did when things got too close, too serious. His horse was tied near the far end of the camp. The guards Chief Martin had posted were good, alert, still as statues, but Jake had slipped through tighter setups before. He knew he could try. He even knew the best route out of the valley. But every time he pictured himself riding away, he saw Anna lying in that trap again, bleeding, alone, whispering warnings through pain she refused to show on her face. She deserved more than being abandoned by the man who saved her, even if that man was a stranger. By dawn, Jake still wasn't sure if he had made a decision, but his feet were moving before his mind caught up. He walked to Chief Martin's hut just as the first light touched the cliffs. The chief was already awake, sharpening a knife with slow, steady strokes. Chief Martin looked up, studying Jake's face for a long moment. Then he nodded once, as if he already knew the answer. You stay, he said. I stay, Jake said quietly. The chief stood, sliding the knife into its sheath. Good. Then we prepare. The next few hours passed in a blur. Chief Martin explained the meaning of the ceremony, how it wasn't just about two people, but about joining families, joining paths, joining futures. He spoke calmly, with a seriousness that made Jake's chest feel heavier with each word. He handed Jake traditional clothing, leather leggings, a beaded shirt, pieces that had belonged to his own father before him. Jake didn't feel worthy of it, but he put them on, adjusting the beadwork that lay across his chest. When Anna finally appeared, the entire world seemed to shift around her. She moved slowly because of her leg, supported by two older women. Someone had woven her long dark hair into a thick braid with feathers and strands of colored beads. She wore a dress made of soft leather, decorated with careful patterns. Even injured, she held herself with a kind of quiet strength that drew the eye without trying. Jake felt his breath catch for a moment, not because of beauty in the usual sense, but because she looked grounded, real, like someone who had survived pain, danger, and still stood tall. She glanced at him, taking in his clothing, and spoke in a voice that carried honesty rather than ceremony. You look different, she said. So do you. A faint smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Are you scared? Jake didn't bother pretending. Terrified. This time she fully smiled just for a moment. Good. Me too. He hadn't expected that. She'd seemed fearless, steady even in agony. Knowing she felt nervous made her feel human in a way that surprised him. He hesitated, then asked, Can I ask you something? Yes. When you asked what kind of man I am, what kind were you hoping for? Anna looked down at her hands, then lifted her eyes again. Her voice softened. A man who stays. A man who fights beside me. A man who doesn't treat me like something he owns. She paused. And a man who chooses this life, not a man forced into it. Jake swallowed. I'm choosing, he said. Why? She asked quietly. She didn't ask it like someone testing him. She asked it like someone who needed to understand the truth. He ran a hand down his face, choosing his words carefully. Because I've been running a long time. From mistakes. From things I broke. From people I disappointed. And maybe it's time I stop. He looked at her fully. And I didn't save you to watch you be handed off to strangers or walk into danger alone. That's not the kind of man I want to be. Anna's expression softened, a vulnerability appearing behind her usually strong eyes. She reached out like she was going to touch his hand, hesitated, and then let her fingers rest briefly against his. It was the smallest gesture, but it felt like the beginning of something neither of them were brave enough to name yet. "Then we find it together," she whispered. A horn sounded outside, low and deep, calling the village to gather. Chief Martin appeared at the entrance, expression solemn. "It is time," he said. Jake and Anna stepped outside, the morning sun warming the red earth as the entire village turned toward them. In that moment, Jake felt something he hadn't felt in years, like he was walking toward a life he hadn't planned, but maybe needed. The entire village formed a wide circle around the open space at its center. Warriors stood shoulder to shoulder, lances driven into the ground like silent witnesses. Women held children close. Elders watched with the stillness of people who had seen countless seasons rise and fall. Jake felt more eyes on him than he had in the last 10 years combined. His palms were damp, his breath tight. But beside him, Anna stood tall, even with her injured leg trembling slightly beneath her dress. Chief Martin stepped into the center, wearing the full regalia of his position. Feathers, bone breastplate, ceremonial paint that gave his face the look of carved stone. He lifted a hand, and the crowd fell silent so completely that Jake could hear the wind cut across the valley. The chief spoke first in Apache, his words rhythmic and heavy with weight. Jake didn't understand the language, but he recognized the tone: honor, debt, unity. When he shifted to English, he looked directly at Jake. "Jake Walker," he said, "you saved my daughter when death was close. You stood guard when enemies came. You gave your hands to her wounds and your courage to her fears." Jake swallowed hard. Hearing it spoken aloud made the moment feel painfully real. Chief Martin turned to Anna. "Anna, daughter of my blood, warrior of our people, do you accept this man as partner in all things? Do you accept his strength when yours falters, his voice beside yours, his life joined with yours?" Anna didn't hesitate. "I accept him," she said, loud enough that the circle heard every word. Her voice was steady, but when she looked at Jake afterward, her eyes softened just slightly. The shift was small but powerful. Chief Martin then faced Jake fully. "Jake Walker, you accept this woman not as burden, but as equal. You accept her people as your people, her battles as your battles, her honor as your honor. Do you stand beside her without stepping ahead or behind?" Jake let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "I accept," he said, and he meant it. The chief nodded once. "Kneel." Jake went down on one knee. Anna lifted her hand toward him. When he took it, her palm was warm, strong, callous from years of riding and work. Chief Martin placed his large hands over theirs. "By our law," he said, "you are bound." A shout broke through the silence, a cheer that rippled across the circle. Warriors slammed lances into the earth in rhythm. Children clapped. Women called out blessings. Jake felt the ground shake with the celebration. But before he could even rise to his feet, the sharp crack of a rifle echoed from the eastern ridge. Another shot followed, then another. The cheering stopped instantly. Warriors reached for weapons. Mothers grabbed children. The air shifted from celebration to danger in a single heartbeat. Anna's hand tightened around Jake's. "They're here," she said. The quiet in her voice was more frightening than panic would have been. A young scout sprinted into the circle, breathless. He spoke rapidly in Apache, pointing toward the hills. Chief Martin's face hardened. "They attack from 3 sides," he said. "They want to scatter us." Jake steadied himself. "What do you need me to do?" The chief grabbed a lance from a warrior and thrust it into Jake's hands. The weapon was heavier than Jake expected, rough in his grip. "You fight with us," Chief Martin said. "This is the life you accepted." Jake stared at the lance. "I've never used one of these." Anna stepped closer, her eyes fierce. Then learn in the next 5 minutes, she said. He half laughed despite the fear. That fast? She leveled her gaze at him. Jake, those men aren't coming to scare us. They're coming to finish what they started. If you run, they will follow. If you hide, people die. Her voice broke slightly, not from weakness, but from something deeper. You stood for me before, stand with me now. Something clicked in his chest. Something that felt like a line he couldn't cross back over. He nodded. I'm with you, he said. All the way. For the first time, Anna truly smiled. Not a small flicker, but something real and almost relieved. Good, she said, grabbing her bow despite her injured leg. Then let's show them they chose the wrong village. They ran toward the horses as more gunfire cracked across the valley. Warriors scattered into formation, calling to each other, readying defenses with practiced ease. The sound of hooves, shouts, and rising fear filled the air. Jake mounted a horse, gripping the lance tight. Anna pulled herself onto her own mount, wincing but refusing help. Jake turned to her. Stay close, he said. Her eyes locked on his. You stay alive, she replied. That's an order. It was the closest thing to tenderness she'd shown all morning. Then the two of them kicked their horses into a full run as the first wave of attackers came into view. And Jake realized this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was the first test of whether he deserved the life he had just accepted. The slavers came hard from the east, 12 riders, rifles raised, dust rolling behind them like a storm. They expected fear. They expected chaos after interrupting a wedding. What they didn't expect was a line of Apache warriors already in motion, already shouting strategy to one another, already prepared to defend their home with the kind of precision that only comes from years of fighting side by side. Jake felt his pulse slam against his ribs as he rode next to Anna. Her horse moved with practiced ease despite her leg, and she balanced her bow as if it were a natural extension of her arm. She drew and released an arrow before Jake even understood which target she was aiming at. A rider fell from his saddle a second later. Jake stared. How do you even? Later, she snapped. Eyes forward. 2 bullets whipped past Jake's ear, so close he felt the heat off one. He gripped the lance tighter, unsure how the hell he was supposed to use it. It felt awkward, unbalanced, like a tool built for someone taller, stronger, more experienced. But running wasn't an option anymore. Anna shouted over the chaos. Keep your horse steady. Use your legs, not your hands. I'm trying. Jake yelled back, wobbling as the horse shifted. If you die right after marrying me, I swear I'm haunting you, she barked. Even in the middle of a battle, she still managed to hit him with the sharpest line of the day. Before he could answer, a familiar voice cut through the noise, the scarred man from the canyon. He spotted Jake instantly, and his face twisted into something between fury and recognition. There you are, he shouted, raising his rifle. Should have shot you when I had the chance. There wasn't time to think. Jake's horse surged forward, the world narrowing to a tunnel where only 2 people existed, him and a man determined to kill him. Anna shouted, Jake, move. Jake didn't move, he acted. He threw the lance. He didn't aim, didn't think, just released in a desperate, clumsy arc. The lance struck the scarred man's horse in the chest, dropping the animal with a brutal crash. The man was flung from the saddle, hitting the rocks hard enough to knock the wind out of him. His rifle fired into the air as he landed. Anna pulled up beside Jake, eyes wide. You threw it. Why would you throw it? I panicked. She stared at him like he'd lost his mind. You don't throw a lance unless you're trying to lose it. Well, it worked. She let out a long breath. Jake, we clearly need to work on your technique. Before they could argue, Chief Martin's voice thundered across the valley, commanding warriors into a tight formation. Hidden riders emerged from the surrounding gullies, surrounding the slavers and cutting off their escape. Jake watched the trap tighten around the attackers, the balance of the fight shifting fast. The scarred slaver staggered to his feet, grabbing a nearby rock to steady himself. You think you win? He snarled. We'll keep coming. Men like us always keep coming. Jake dismounted and stepped toward him, breath ragged but steady. Not today, he said. The man spat at him. You married their woman. You think they'll treat you like one of them? You think they'll trust you? Jake didn't flinch. I don't need them to trust me. I just need to stand in the right place. And where's that? The man sneered. Jake turned slightly, catching sight of Anna riding up beside him, her bow lowered but ready. Right beside her, Jake said, where I chose to be. The scarred man looked from Jake to Anna, and something like understanding and hatred flashed in his eyes. Then you're already dead, he growled. Before the man could reach for his knife, 3 Apache warriors were on him, ending the threat with a swift, practiced brutality Jake didn't dare look away from. The battle ended faster than it had begun. Dust settled over the valley. Smoke drifted from spent rifles. 12 bodies lay on the ground. Not a single Apache had fallen. Even the horses calmed quickly, as if they too understood the danger had passed. Anna dismounted carefully, wincing as her leg took weight. Jake rushed to steady her, but she lifted a hand. I'm fine, she said, though her breath shook. You don't have to act strong right now, Jake murmured. Anna looked straight at him, voice low but firm. Jake, I'm not acting. He felt a flush of shame at how casually he'd misread her strength. She wasn't pretending. She was surviving. She pulled the lance from the fallen horse and handed it back to him. You fought today. Not perfect, but you didn't run. Her voice softened just a little. That matters. Jake swallowed. You think I did enough? She met his eyes with a seriousness that pinned him in place. You did what you could. You stayed. You fought beside us. That's what counts. She touched his arm, her fingers gentle despite everything. You're not one of us yet, but today you didn't stand apart. You stood with us. Chief Martin approached then, blood on his hands but pride in his eyes. He looked Jake up and down. You fight badly, he said, but you do not hide. That makes you worthy. Jake let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Anna's hand lingered at his arm as if grounding him, steadying him. For the first time in years, Jake felt like he belonged somewhere, even if he hadn't earned all of it yet. And for the first time since he'd arrived in the valley, Anna didn't look at him like a stranger. She looked at him like a man she might someday trust. The village slowly returned to motion as the dead were carried away and the warriors dispersed to secure the valley. Jake stood beside Anna, catching his breath while the air still smelled of gunpowder and dust. The world felt heavier now, quieter, but not peaceful. Not yet. Anna leaned on her horse for support, her legs shaking despite her stubborn attempt to hide the pain. Jake stepped closer. Sit down before you fall down, he said gently. She shot him a tired glare. I don't fall. Everyone falls. Not today, she said, refusing to waver. Jake let out a small breath. Anna, I'm not trying to take your strength. I'm trying to share some of mine. Her eyes softened at that, just barely. You don't have much strength to spare right now. He laughed quietly. Fair point. She reached for his arm then, holding on not because she needed help, but because she allowed herself to. That small shift meant more to Jake than any words. Around them, villagers gathered. Some touched Anna's shoulder in gratitude. Others nodded at Jake with a respectful caution. Children watched him openly, whispering to each other like he was some strange new animal that wandered into their home. Chief Martin approached, his expression stern but his posture relaxed. He looked at Jake for a long moment before speaking. You fought today, he said. Not because you had to, because you chose to. Jake nodded. I made a promise. The chief's eyes narrowed slightly. A promise to my daughter? Or to yourself? Jake hesitated, but Anna answered softly before he could. Both. Chief Martin studied his daughter, then Jake, and after a moment he gave a slow nod. Then you understand what marriage means to us. It is not chains. It is weight, shared weight. Jake held the chief's gaze. I'm learning. Slowly. Martin's lips twitched. Very slowly. But you learn. Anna smirked. He learns like a tired horse. Jake looked at her. I just saved your life. You did not, she shot back. You threw a lance at a horse. I admit my technique needs work. It needs divine intervention, she muttered. Jake opened his mouth to reply, but Chief Martin raised a hand. Enough. His voice carried authority, but not anger. There is more to discuss. The chief's tone shifted. Something heavier entered the space. These men who attacked us, Martin said quietly, were not alone. They worked for someone. Someone with more money, more guns, more purpose. Anna's jaw tightened. I knew it. Jake frowned. You think there are more slavers out there? Not think, the chief said. No. He pointed toward the eastern horizon. They build something in the low canyons, far from trails. They plan to take more people. Not only Apache. Anyone they can capture. Jake felt a cold unease crawl down his spine. How many? Enough to be dangerous, the chief replied. Enough to start a war. Anna looked at her father. We take a party and end them before they gather strength. No, Martin said firmly. Not now. Our people need rest. We count our supplies. We heal our wounded. Anna, clench your jaw. We let them prepare. The chief turned to her. We live another day. Jake watched their exchange, feeling the weight of their decisions, even though he had barely entered their world. He stepped forward. I can go. Anna snapped her head toward him. The hell you can. Jake stood his ground. I can scout. I can move fast and quiet. I know the canyons. I've lived out here longer than I've lived anywhere. You nearly died 10 minutes ago, she said, her voice sharp. You think one lucky throw makes you a warrior? It makes me someone who wants to help, Jake said. Someone who owes you more than you owe me. Anna stepped closer until they were inches apart. You don't owe me, she whispered. You chose to stand with us. That is enough. Jake held her gaze. Not for me. Her breath faltered at that answer. Chief Martin watched them, unreadable. You volunteered to scout? Jake nodded. If it keeps your people safe, yeah. The chief crossed his arms. You understand the danger. If they catch you, they do not kill you quick. Jake swallowed. I understand. Anna shook her head, her voice shaking with frustration. Why are you doing this? You just became part of us. Why risk your life already? Jake looked at her, his voice low. Because belonging doesn't mean standing behind you. It means standing beside you, even when it scares me. Anna stared at him, eyes flickering with something she tried hard to hide. You're an idiot, she murmured. Probably, Jake said with a small smile. A brave idiot, she corrected reluctantly. She exhaled shakily and touched his chest, brief, almost hesitant. If you die, Jake, I will never forgive you. Not because you're my husband, she swallowed hard, but because you're the first person who didn't walk away. Jake felt something heavy settle in his chest. Something warm. Something terrifying. I'm coming back, he said softly. I promise. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Keep that promise. Jake nodded. Chief Martin broke the silence. You leave at dawn. Jake straightened. I'll be ready. Anna looked away, fighting emotion like it was an enemy she refused to show weakness to. But Jake saw it. He felt it. And for the first time since arriving in the valley, the fear of belonging was replaced by the fear of losing the place or the person he was finally beginning to belong to. Jake left before sunrise, the sky still deep blue except for a thin silver line stretching across the horizon. The air was cold enough to sting his lungs, and the valley behind him was silent except for a distant dog barking and the faint rustle of waking birds. He didn't look back. Not because he didn't want to, but because he knew if he saw Anna standing there, watching him, he might not have had the strength to go. He rode hard for hours, letting the early light guide him across the dry riverbeds and narrow passes. Every sound made him tense. Every shadow made him reach for the rifle strapped at his back. Being alone out here wasn't new to him, but being alone for someone was. That changed everything. By midday, he found what the chief feared. Tracks, wagon ruts, remnants of a fire pit too large for a simple camp. He followed the trail to a ridge overlooking a hidden canyon, and the sight below made his stomach drop. More than 20 men, horses tied, crates stacked, a half-built wooden pen, tools scattered, a whip hanging from a post like a warning. Jake clenched his jaw. This wasn't planning. This was already in motion. He ducked behind the rocks, watching, counting, memorizing faces. Routes, weak spots, everything he could carry back with him. And then he heard a voice behind him. Well now, someone drawled, look what wandered in. Jake froze. The barrel of a rifle touched his back. He slowly raised his hands. Listen, he said, controlling his breath. You don't want to do this. The man chuckled. You scouting for those savages? Or for yourself? Doesn't matter either way. Jake turned his head just enough to see the man's eyes. Cold, flat, hungry. The kind of man who didn't need reasons to hurt people. Then a sudden whistle cut through the canyon. An arrow struck the rifle clean out of the slaver's hands. Jake dove, rolling behind a boulder. When he looked up, Anna was on the ridge above, bow drawn, her injured leg braced against the rock. "Move, Jake," she shouted. He didn't stop to ask how she found him. He didn't waste a second. He ran downhill as the slavers scrambled, some reaching for their horses, others grabbing guns. Chief Martin's voice echoed across the canyon like thunder. A wave of Apache warriors appeared on both ridges, arrows already flying. They'd followed Anna because she'd followed Jake. The fight was chaos and dust and shouts. Jake grabbed a fallen gun and covered Anna's descent down the ridge. She moved slower than usual, her leg dragging, but she didn't stop. She didn't hesitate. She reached him breathless. "You idiot," she whispered urgently. "You said you'd come back." "And I was working on it," Jake shot back. "You didn't have to." She grabbed his shirt and pulled him close. "Yes, I did." They ducked behind a rock as bullets cracked overhead. The slavers tried to retreat, but the warriors had already closed off their escape. The Apaches swept through the canyon with fierce precision, ending the threat once and for all. When it was over, the valley fell quiet again, except for the heavy breaths of the living. Jake slumped against the rocks, adrenaline draining from his body. Anna sat beside him, pressing a hand to his shoulder. "You scared me," she said softly. "You scared me first," he replied. She let out a shaky laugh, the kind that comes only after danger passes. Chief Martin approached them, dust on his face but relief in his eyes. "You found them," he said, "because you went alone, because you risked your life." Jake looked at Anna. "Because I wasn't running anymore." The chief nodded. "Then you understand our way. A man is not measured by where he comes from, but by what he stands for." Jake lowered his gaze. "I'm trying." "Trying is enough," Anna whispered. "Trying means you stay." Jake reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she lifted their joined hands and rested them against her heart, like a promise exchanged without needing words. As the tribe prepared to return home, Jake paused at the ridge and looked back at the canyon below. The broken pen, the scattered weapons, the end of something dark. Anna stood beside him, the wind pulling at her braid. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That maybe I spent too much of my life believing I had nothing left to offer," Jake said quietly. "But maybe I was wrong." Anna squeezed his hand gently. "You were never broken, Jake. Just lost." He turned to her, meeting her steady eyes. "And now," she said, "you're found." They rode back to the village side by side, neither leading nor following, the space between them small and certain. Moral lesson: sometimes life breaks us not because we are weak, but because we are meant to be rebuilt into something braver. Running from our past only deepens the wound, but choosing to stay, choosing to fight, choosing to belong, that is how we learn who we truly are.